you can ask us whatever questions you like. Could be about what we talked about today. It could be about Ananda, about Swami Kriyananda, about anything you would really like to ask. So it's free-range questions.
Do they have to be gluten-free?
Tell them your line.
Okay. The very first time we visited Laurelwood, the first summer, and some people, I mean, I respect everyone's dietary choices, but there were a number of people that were gluten-free, but they really didn't know how to do it, and they were the cooks. And so everything, this is gluten-free, and that's going, and it didn't taste that good. So, I mean, and again, I do respect it. We try not to eat a lot of gluten ourselves, but, it was sort of like a little bit over the top. And everything was, this is gluten-free, and that's gluten-free, and that's gluten-free. And so when we arrived, there was this beautiful wheat field. And so then a few days later, when we drove by, it had been harvested. And I said, look, a gluten-free field. So anyway, things have evolved since then. I just wanted to share one other thought that I wanted to work in this morning, but there wasn't time. And that's about balancing your life. And honestly, I think one of the most important things is to set priorities. You can't do it all. Maybe, I want to go this and do that and do this. But you just finally have to say, what is, use the criteria that we gave this morning about what will further my spiritual evolution in all the possibilities of actions that I could take, and then prioritize those. And if you have time to do things that are, not going in that direction, fine. We were just recently having lunch with an old friend of ours who is a longtime devotee. He doesn't live at Ananda, he lives in Hawaii, but he was visiting. And he was always a very active man, very dynamic, going. And we asked him how he was, and he said, well, I just have had some really serious health problems. They had the veins in my legs, the major blood vessels, collapsed, and they had to put, other veins in. Some of you know the procedure. But he said, they told me the reason was because I'd been on my feet for 14, 16 hours a day. I was always doing something. And the body needs to have the feet elevated. I mean, and for part of the time. And so all the little valves in the veins just sort of shut down because the blood was always going down and it couldn't pump the blood back up. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting, that we need to take time where literally we put our feet up and let the body accommodate and rest. And so to find balance in your life, there should be honoring your commitments to friends, family, to financial demands, to your own spiritual life. But included in all that is time to not do anything. To find balance in your life, you have to come to the rest point every day. It can be done in meditation, it can be done just simply sitting quietly, it can be done in reading, but whatever it is, you have to come to the rest point. And if your life isn't allowing that, then I think we all need to look inside and say, what can I eliminate that allows me to have that rest point? Because otherwise, we just burn ourselves out. So I wanted to share that this morning, and I didn't get to. So now, I think we can see if you all have any questions. Bharati. You can tell she's a school teacher. She does.
Following in this same vein, I remember Swami Kriyananda was here on his 70th birthday, or right around that time, and he was talking about the importance of shifting, from a real active life to I forget whether it's third ashram or fourth ashram or whatever, but doing that, and then then he went on to do a bazillion other things, but I remember he sent an email out at one point in his later years saying, okay, I haven't been a good example of this, but it's really important. And so I just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's obviously something that many people at Ananda are dealing with, because our first generation, some of us are a little past the time when he gave that talk, you know. So we're looking at that whole dynamic. The real dilemma is how to shift from outward activity to more inward activity without losing the oomph or the amount of energy. We're so used to, when we relax outer energy and tension, again coming back to energization this morning, that helps counter it. But we're so used to, when we relax, we slump. And the energy goes down, and the energy is not only lower in the spine, but there's less will behind it, less force behind it. And so what we don't want to have is a life where we stop activity but don't substitute something else that's, again, as Devi was saying, of higher priority. The 4 ashrams in India show us a really good progression of this, and America especially is like the antithesis of the last 2 ashrams. And so the 4 ashrams are, the first one is the student stage, and you're learning how to use your body, how to use your mind, how to speak, how to do all of those things, and that lasts up until you're finished with your schooling. And then the next stage is when you're actively pursuing a career. You become a householder at that stage, typically in India. You become a householder, you take on responsibility, you have to learn a trade, you have to practice a trade, you have to figure out how to lead a successful life, you have to figure out how to raise a family. That's the second ashram. Now, America understands those two. The third ashram is to begin to let go of that outer responsibility so that you're not doing, but at that stage you should be doing more mentoring and helping the people in the second ashram to fulfill their dharma. That's the third ashram. But I remember seeing a cartoon in the New Yorker where they have this kind of board meeting with the big table and all these old men sitting around it, and the caption says, "It's been moved and seconded that we change mandatory retirement age to 96. All those in favor." You know, and so America fights that letting go because by and large we don't have an inner life that we should shift the energy to. And so that begins to look like you're going to die. And in fact, many people do die at the time they retire. The most dangerous time, I don't know if it's still true, it's beginning to shift now, but the most dangerous time is within the first 1.5 or 2 years after retirement. There's a big blip of death at that time. But that's for people that don't have an inner life. And if you don't have an inner life and have not developed it, then you either kind of, well, as Julia Child said, you either fall off the raft at that point. We had a lot of friends who gradually they fell off the raft, meaning they passed away. So you either fall off the raft or you kind of cease to be very, I don't know, to have much Shakti. And so, but those with an inner life should begin in the third ashram to shift their energy more and more to their inner life. Now, one of the things about Swami, and one of the things that happened in his life, is after his heart operation, he had an artificial valve put in and a pacemaker, and he couldn't achieve the depth of meditation that he had been able to do before that physical operation. And so the normal shift that he might have had to longer hours of meditation,
He
and
couldn't go breathless because if you would stop breathing, the
pacemaker would kick in. And so for him, his whole life was dedicated to tuning his life to master. He couldn't do it as much inwardly as he himself would have liked, so he continued to do that activity outwardly, but he didn't necessarily recommend it for others. And then the fourth ashram, so that's the third ashram where you pull back, but you still keep an advisory role in the world. And the fourth ashram, in India, you retire to the forest or retire to the Himalayas, and you just spend the final years of your life trying to achieve self-realization or God realization. Now, we're struggling with that whole paradigm at Ananda, because now, one thing is the theory of it all. Now the time is approached where we're needing to put it into practice. I must say, Devi and I are not very good examples. We're good examples of the third ashram, I must say, because we have, to a great extent, turned over management responsibilities and organizational guidance. But Ananda's still a young work, and we don't have a plethora of people who've been trained and who've come up. So we're having to carry a certain organizational role farther than what would really feel natural to us. Both of us, I think I'll speak for myself, but we long for the time when we can have more seclusion and more quiet time, but it's just more important to us than those outer things is our complete, absolute self-offering to Master, to this path, and to whatever Dharma is asked of us to do. So we're working with that lesson, which is complete removal of any resistance to what needs to happen. But in an ideal world, we would have lots of other people who need the opportunity to be doing what we're doing, and we wouldn't travel so much, we wouldn't do all of those things quite so much, but we would mentor, and then eventually, a little later on, we would probably stop outward activity and just go into kind of seclusion and meditation and, some teaching, but not as active as we are. But all of that, we're struggling to get that paradigm right for Ananda.
But there's also the fact that everyone's individual dharma is different.
Right.
And I think what Swami was saying, and when the letter that Bharati is referring to it surprised us all when Swami said, it's really good to plan to have the last years of your life where you're really withdrawn and having a more inward meditative life. And I haven't, Swamiji said, I haven't been a good example, but I don't want you all to think that you necessarily have to follow my example. But at the same time, when Jyotish, I agree with what Jyotish said, but at the same time, there are 2 points. One, we're second generation disciples of a great world avatar who came to change the consciousness of the planet. And so it's not a life where we're going to get a lot of downtime. You know, this is a very dynamic mission. Maybe, 5 generations from now, the majority of the people on earth will honor Sanatan Dharma and be meditating and so forth. But now, as we've been saying all morning, we're swimming against the current. And we just have to, it's like that line in Alice in Wonderland where I think it's Through the Looking Glass, where she's walking with the White Queen. And the White Queen looks at the watch and says, "Oh, we have to start running." So they're running and running and running. And she said, "Okay, now we can stop." And Alice looks, and they're in the exact same place as they started. And she said, "But we've been running and we haven't gone anywhere." And the White Queen says, "Oh, yes, in our country, we have to run as fast as we can just to stay where we are." And I mean, that's sort of how our society works. But on a higher octave, I think in this lifetime, we have to work really hard to help establish Master's work. I remember Swami talking to 2 of our members. This was, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago in Assisi. And these are 2 men that had been involved with the work for a long time. And he said, Ananda's work is like a beachhead, like when the Allies landed at Normandy on D-Day, and you had to just give it everything you had. And so I think you have to factor that in to what you see around you. And then also to factor in how do we complete our karma? It's like our son says to us, "When are you guys going to stop?" And we just say, when it's the right time. And maybe something will happen or things will change and we'll stop. But I can feel now for us, somebody asked, Anna Burdell asked a question Thursday night out at Laurelwood, and it was no one had ever asked me that question. She said, how, since Swami's passing and when you're doing all this teaching and traveling, what changes do you see in yourself? And I had never really thought about that, but I could see all the growth that had come from all that. And so I thought, we'll keep going as long as God gives us the strength to keep going, because I can feel it's a good thing. So anyway, it's a lot of different levels that question could be answered on.
And you can't answer too much personally, because Devi and I have a relatively unique role in the whole drama. And so...
Cheshire Cat.
Cheshire Cat, yeah. And Swami had an even more unique role. And so, but he didn't want the fact that he had a unique role to set the model or the precedent for everyone else, because it wouldn't be right. But we should ideally begin, after our active time, begin to interiorize the energy. And it's almost like, the early years, the energy is going more and more outward, and then it peaks, and then it should go more and more inward until by the time it comes back to where it started, it should be completely inward, but without losing the energy or the momentum that's there.
Okay, Kathy?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by what you said about Swami having a period when he couldn't go as deep as he wanted because of his pacemaker, and certainly I'm not unique in having dealt with some situations that prevent doing as much as I would like, and I'm really interested to hear what he said about that, if there's any more that he said about that.
Well,
and also just the end period of his life, because I know that you said that or someone said that he became enlightened, and I sort of knew him in the 1980s a little bit. And anything you care to say?
Okay. The question was for the recording. Kathy said she was interested in what we said about Swami not being able to meditate deeply toward the end of his life, and how he dealt with that, and just anything that she had heard, it kind of alluded to that he became enlightened, and anything we could share about the end of his life. Well, he just, it actually was very inspiring how he dealt with it, because when we were with him, when he went to the doctor, the heart surgeon, it was a young Indian doctor, and he said, well, we're going to put this pacemaker in, and if your breathing and heartbeat go below a certain level, it'll kick in and stimulate the heart. And Swami just sat there and he looked at him and he said, well, what about if I go breathless? Because I practice yoga. And the doctor just laughed at him. He said, oh, yes, yes, yes. But he saw that before it even happened as a problem. And then after the surgery, he couldn't do the kriyas as deeply as he would. But, it was so beautiful because there was never any self-pity, never any remorse or regret. And he just said, well, then I'll throw my life into service. If I can't commune with Master deeply in meditation, I will serve him with everything I've got. And that was the way the last years of his life looked. And there were many occasions where, particularly in India, where he had a big talk that was scheduled, and he was very ill, whatever, fever or, belly or whatever it might be, and he was in bed, and then there was one occasion where he said he had a big talk at noon, and he asked us, will you do it in my place? And we said, of course, Swamiji. And so we were just about to leave the house, and then his bedroom door opened, and there he was, totally looking well, ready to go. And he said, let's go. And he gave a beautiful talk for an hour and a half, and then he came back, and he would often then collapse into bed after that. But so he just, it was a period of total, utter self-offering to the Guru. If you give me the ability to meditate deeply, that's wonderful. If you take that away, I'm still yours. I will find a way to serve you. If you compromise my health so that I can't serve you, I will do the best that I can in any case. And I'll just say this. I have no way of knowing, and I don't know that, I don't know. I have no way, you have to be there to know, you have to be one to know one. I'm not enlightened, so I can't say, well, on February 3rd, 2008, Swami became enlightened. But what I did see over the years was that he became transparent. And it was just a progression. And, Master said to him, you won't find God till the end of life. Death will be your final sacrifice. And Swami contemplated what that meant frequently towards the end. But it seemed, in retrospect, you will have to keep serving, and that final veil of oneness with God won't be removed until all your service is done. But still at the same time, looking back on many occasions with Swami, sometimes he would invite us over for tea at his apartment at Crystal Hermitage, and we'd come in, and he'd be reclining in his lounge chair, and we would walk in, and his eyes maybe were a little closed, and he was so clearly in bliss. And then we'd walk in, and he'd oh, how are you? Do you want some tea? And he'd just switch immediately. But so I think it was gradual, but I think it was more present than he let us see. So,
yeah, I don't have very much to add. He became, there are traditionally 8 ways that God manifests, light and sound and love and joy. And he became a beacon of those qualities. So as like the veils of personality or of ego fell away, he became like just a channel of love and kindness. It was amazing. And one time we were in Los Angeles, and he would like to go to this one particular area. It was flat. There was about a 2-block walk in one direction, and you could cross the street, and 2 blocks the other, and little shops, nice shops along the way. And he would enjoy kind of window shopping and seeing things. And so we were walking down, a group of us, one side, and then we came back the other, and he saw a shop, and he said, "Oh, this pretty things, let's go in here." And the woman proprietress said, "Oh, I was so hoping that you would come in to my shop and bless it." And she didn't. He was dressed in a sports coat and, or jacket, or I don't know what exactly, but none of us were dressed in any way that would indicate something different than normal. But he said, "Well, why is that?" She said, "I was watching you and the group walk down the street, and there was just a bubble of light around you. And I was so hoping that you would bring that light into my shop." And so he just became those qualities of God that we talk about. He became love, he became light, he became bliss or joy. And he didn't talk about it so much as he just radiated it. And so that's what I saw toward the end of his life, and the fact that he couldn't do one practice but could do a different kind of practice. His whole life was just about attuning and offering to Master. And so that all increased. But even though outwardly his life seemed to be still active and outward, inwardly it was more and more inward, and just the radiation of the qualities of God.
We were, in the last years, we were on a plane in India with him, and it was a crowded, small domestic plane. And I think he was wearing Western clothes.
Yeah, he was.
And we weren't, because it was crowded, he was sitting in one section and we were sitting in the back. And then, or maybe, anyway, maybe he was sitting behind us, because then he started walking up the aisle, and very crowded. And there was an Indian man behind us, and because we were Westerners, he kind of assumed we were together. He said, "Who is that man?" And it just, crowded little airplane in Western clothes, an elderly man, not very, rather fragile. And we said, "That's Swami Kriyananda." And this man said, "India needs more people like him." I mean, what did he know of him? Nothing. Yeah. And it just happened often. And, and I don't know if you want to share the story about the masseuse, the boy.
Oh, there's a very lovely story. As I said, toward the end of his life, he just became an expression of kindness and love. And at one point he had flown from Europe, Italy, to India, and traveled by this time. He was probably 3 years before his passing, 2 years. It had become very difficult on his body. And so when he arrived at the ashram in Gurgaon, as you saw last night, that ashram, or actually it was a different house, but there in that neighborhood, one of the people said, "Swami, we have a young man who is a very good masseuse, and maybe you would like to have a massage. We can tell him to give a very gentle massage, but it could help." And Swami said, "Yes, I think that'd be helpful." So this young man came, and he was giving Swami a massage on the bed, and it was kind of low, and he had to stoop over. And Swami said to him, "Wouldn't it be better if you had a massage table?" And the young man said, well, it would be better, but sir, they're quite expensive. And Swami pursued it a little bit, and the young man said, well, you see, I have a wife and 2 small children. This is my second job. I'm doing all of this just to earn enough to keep our family going. And Swami said, why don't you find out what it would cost to get one? Because it would be helpful to you, and I'll pay for it. And I think he asked him how much it was, and the young man said, oh, they're very expensive. I think it'll be 10,000 rupees or something.
Which is?
Which is a couple of $100 at that time. And so Swami said, well, find out and let me know, because I'd like to buy you one. And then the next day he came back again to work on Swami. And he said, oh, sir, I checked, and they're much more expensive. They're 25,000 rupees, which like $500. And Swami said, that's fine. Please find one and go and purchase it and have the bill sent to me. And the young man was shocked. And so he agreed. But as he was leaving, he stopped to talk to one of the people in the ashram. And it's very touching. It's hard to even tell this story. He said, I was orphaned as a young child, and I grew up on the streets without any parents, just fending for myself. And he said, one of the great holes in my heart was that I never knew the love of a father. But now I've received that. And so that kindness, Swami at the later stage of his life was just an expression of Divine Mother and Master. And, you know, that being is much more important than any kind of the doing, whether it's meditation or activity or anything. That's the real fourth ashram, where you cease doing and you become a being.
So, Sandy.
Thank you for all of that. My track is very, very much different than this. I'd rather just stay here, frankly, but this is also really important. So, when I hear, and I've been hearing this since I started in Manado last August, and I took the Raja Yoga course, and there's a, if you have emotions, just, bring them up the spine. I haven't taken Kriya, I've, become a disciple, and I've been really grappling with, I'm a very emotional person. Big highs, pretty deep lows, and at work, I'm a nurse. At work, I can just give and have so much space for people. And just, I even had my patient who had literally just bled all over the floor. I come in and I'm basically rescuing her from, she's freaking out because she's bleeding all over the place. She was literally leaving the hospital at that moment, right? And she's bleeding all over the floor. So I fix it and I'm totally reassuring her and everything's fine. And her next words are, my medication is late. And so now this is exactly what I'm pointing to right now. It feels like in Ananda the teaching is just, I had a lot of emotion in that moment. I'm like, are you serious? Really? Number one, you're supposed to be gone already, but I got this extra test for you, and then that test cost a lot of bleeding. And I really was. I was like, wow. And I've been dealing with her for 2 days, and everything that she said came out in this really harsh kind of demand. You've already done it wrong, that you haven't done what I asked, but she hadn't asked it yet. That was the first time that you'd hear it, right? So I finally looked at her and I said, so tell me what you think was more important in that moment. Was it more important to stop the bleeding, or was it more important to manage your pain? Well, I guess the bleeding. I said, that's what I was thinking.
really love it. If you ask me in a nice way, could you please get my pain medication now? And she was very, like, you could tell, wow, I had hit it hard. I had hit a deep chord. Her son says, now you know what I've been dealing with for the last whatever. I wasn't hoping for that. But I really was, like, I really do feel like I gave her a gift in that moment of being able to very kindly say what I needed. I needed some kindness. I needed some reverence for, reverence isn't the right word. I needed some reciprocation of, it would be helpful for me if you had a little bit of gratitude first, and then asked for what you needed. I am so happy to help you then. And I think that it's going to help you when you go home with your son to be that way with him, because he's going to have to do a lot for you for a little while. And I did say that to him.
Good.
And he was so thankful. He literally, like, I get this, it happens to me frequently, because I'm willing to say these really challenging things in the nicest possible way to help people. To, this probably isn't going to go that well. And I want to share something that I think will really help you. What I hear is, it feels like there's something about, don't let people know that you're upset, or, don't have that emotion. And what I attempt to do, I can do it much better at work than I can at home.
No, we're not going to ask you the truth of that situation.
Yeah.
Oh, he knows. With him and my son, I have a 14-year-old right now, and wow, he is stretching me. And just trying to, so my question is, I feel like, and I just did it with my dad, wow, I'm having a lot of intense emotions about what you just said. And I sent him this email. And it was a really like, wow, we hit it to the core. I went right in there. And I did it with as much compassion and with as much honesty and grace as I was able. My mother still said, strong parts in there. There was a little bit, maybe you didn't need to do all of that. And she said, to be clear about this, at 50 years old for me, everything's going to change now, Sandy. And I feel like I hear, and it's taken me a long time to get to the point now that I can take these emotions, these intense things that I have, triggers from childhood, issues that I have with people or whatever, and be able to transmute them into something beautiful that I don't feel like all I do is shove and then try and get it to go up my spine. And I gotta tell you, that line of trying to get it to go up your spine, it's like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what that is. I'm willing to sit up straight when I'm having those emotions. I'm willing to breathe when I have those emotions. I think that's been really helpful. But just talk to that, please.
Okay. There are about 15 questions in there.
But basically the answer is bring your emotions up your spine.
But there are layers and layers of how to deal with things. So, if somebody insults you, it takes 21 muscles to frown, but it only takes 7 muscles to reach out and smack them. So that's one level. That's the reactive level. But then you have to begin to ask yourself, not what did it do for them, but what did that reactive process do for me? Did it make me happier? Did it make me more fulfilled? Did it really work with the emotion that I had? Tomorrow or next week, is that reactive nature going to be strengthened by that behavior, or is it going to be quelled a little bit by that how I handled that situation? Repressing emotion does not work. In fact, it's negative. And so it's better to, to react than to repress for most of the time. I mean, you can do some real damage in, say, a close relationship when you overreact or react in the wrong way. So it's better to not do the damage at the time in the reaction, but not to repress. Go out for a walk and beat up on a tree or something, I don't know what, but you don't necessarily want to repress. But that increasing the amplitude of the emotion is not going to lead to your own happiness. It might seem like a relief at the moment that happens, but that relief honestly is due to habitual patterns that you have. It's not due to something that is going to really serve you in the long run, but you have over lifetimes, and in this lifetime, you have reacted and trained so that the strong reaction feels comfortable to you, or automatic to you may be a better way of doing it. Now, to repress that is not going to get rid of it, but to exacerbate it or to continue to practice it is also not going to get rid of it. So
when you say practice it,
I mean, okay,
I'm not practicing anything here. It's just coming up.
you're practicing it. I mean, it may be coming up, but that doesn't mean that
When he used the word practice, he means you are
continuing it. You're
continuing that
acting
behavioral
it out.
pattern.
Okay.
So that emotion, let's trace back. That emotion starts with some trigger that goes on in your brain or in your reactive process. So that trigger goes off. Almost always you have a little bit of control in the very beginning of that triggering mechanism.
Which is why now I have a little bit more control
Right.
over being able to say it in a graceful way.
Right,
So I get
right.
that. Okay.
And so if you stop that triggering mechanism before it has a time to get going, is that repression? No, because you stop the negative emotion in its tracks before it comes up. And the practice of meditation over a long time, there are many brain changes that happen in meditation. The forefront, the prefrontal lobes of the brain grow bigger and more active. The deeper ones, the ones that are more fight and flight, those areas of the brain begin to have less energy in them. So that isn't repression. That isn't saying the energy is there and now I'm going to strangle myself not to react. The practices change the initial reactive process. And so for yogis who have been practicing a long time, it's not easy to startle them. Sometimes, in all relationships, there are little things. So Devi will sometimes try to scare me, or I'll sometimes try to scare her. It's not easy to do it anymore.
What he means by that
Startle.
is like jumping out of a closet. That kind of thing.
Right. No, I don't mean the knife, When I was early on the path, I participated in an experiment at the University of Davis in California. And they were studying meditation and its effects and so on. Early studies, this was 1972, 73, early studies of brain waves and meditation. And so they hooked me up to all these electrodes. I was one of a number of subjects. And
How long have you been meditating by the time?
2 or 3 years. No,
No.
more than that, 5 or 6 years, probably. And but they were trying, that was a long time in I was a subject with quite a long history of meditation. So they had you meditate, and they told you that when you were achieving deep meditation, you're supposed to press a little button to indicate, because they didn't have any way of,
Right.
yeah,
People measure it that way.
right. And so I was meditating and doing that, which is what I thought the experiment was about. And then at one point, the door of this lab opened up, and this guy came in. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize there was something going on in here." And he walked out and he slammed it, kind of noisily shut the door and left. What they were really measuring in the experiment was how quickly your brain waves came back to a regular rhythm instead of being way off. And I've since read, I never saw the results of that, but I've since read studies of that exact nature, and people who are long-term or deep meditators, they'll return to their state in 30 seconds or a minute, and others might be 15 minutes where their brain is still reacting. Now, is that repression? No, it's retraining of the triggering mechanisms and retraining of the brain. And so the meditation practices that we do are not meant to repress. So if you're having a reactive episode, then it's better not to repress that. It's better to let it go, although try to minimize the damage that that might do to a husband, a father, a relation. Yeah, the outward damage to other people, exactly. You don't want to startle them into the knife routine, you know? Yeah, and so there you have to maybe control that reactive process, not just let it, let it blow all the time. But gradually, this whole practice will begin to calm the brain, calm the reactive process without repression. And that's what we're talking about in transmuting. So if you take that same energy that goes into a strong reaction, which is your habitual pattern right now, and you retrain that so that it goes into a positive emotion. So let's come back to the bleeding patient and the medication and her you know, her obviously improper, incorrect response to you. What if you didn't have a very reactive process, and at the very moment that happened, you had more of a sense, without repression, you had more of a sense of control, and you could have said, instead of, I mean, maybe you didn't say it out loud, but your reaction was, that is a totally improper reaction, and it's my place to put you in your place. If you didn't have that reaction, and you could have looked at what her needs were at that time, and then reacted to her needs. Maybe she did need to be told that that's not going to be helpful, that kind of thing. But telling it without your emotional wavelength on it, sometimes we've told people that what your Swami has told us this in things, the way that you're saying something prevents me from hearing what you're saying. And so you could still tell the person that that's not helpful behavior, but you wouldn't have the emotional overload that would make her, whether not the words, but vibrationally react back in the same way. So the more you come into kind of a sense of calmness, being calm and cheerful, but truly calm and cheerful, not, I'm supposed to be calm and cheerful. No, I am, you know. but actually achieving that state, then the world around you begins to react to that vibrational level that you have.
I'll just add a little bit. Jyotish just referred to it, but once there was a situation where something wasn't going very well at Ananda, in the greater Ananda world, and someone was not acting in a proper way. And Swami called us in and asked our opinion, and I felt very strongly about it, and I said it very strongly, and Swami said to me, I can't hear what you're saying when you color it with so much emotion. And then someone else came in just at that moment. Swami asked her what she thought of the situation. She said the exact same words that I said, but from a place of calmness. And Swami said, yes, I accept that. So it was all for me to see, I think, you know. But being in a service, personal care occupation like nursing, I mean, you see people at their most vulnerable, their most fearful, their most striking out to try to gain control over their lives. And you have to try to absorb those emotions and give back. I mean, I'm not saying you should, but I worked in a nursing home for a while too, in college as a part-time job. And, you just have to absorb it the best you can and try to give the feedback that's necessary. I remember once, nothing like what you went through, but there was a woman in this nursing home where I worked, and every day at 4 o'clock, her 2 daughters would come and visit her, every day. And she was kind of a grumpy lady too, not very nice. And, but she was in pain, there are reasons. But there were some people in this nursing home who had no one, never had a visitor, didn't have family, friends. And so one day it was a blizzard, this was in Wisconsin, and the daughters were late. I mean, it was hard to drive. And so this woman, oh, no one cares about me, I have these 2 ungrateful daughters, and on and on. And I couldn't help it. I just said, Mrs. Jensen, that wasn't her name, but I'll use that name, Mrs. Jensen, that's very selfish of you. Your daughters come every day. Some people here have no one. And they'll come when it's a snowstorm outside, And she got very quiet. I don't know that it changed her. But I felt it was needed to be said, just as you felt, and rightly so, that needed to be said. But it's more where it goes wrong for us is when we let our emotions get involved. And it's not like where we start thinking, we start having an emotional connection with that situation. So it's not like you repress it, but you just sort of say what you need to say, but you don't need the power of negative emotions to convey what you're trying to say as a carrier wave. It can be said, the same words, but with your heart calm, with your heart loving, with your heart supportive to, here's a frightened woman in pain, losing control over her life, and that's why she's acting that way. But she still needed the feedback. I think you were right to say, I was doing, your response wasn't appropriate. But then it's a training process, and you have to just practice. It's something that I've learned, honestly, over years of marriage. If something's bothering you, rather than just blurting it out, give it the time and the thought to think what it is you want to say to the person, and choose the moment wisely when you want to say it. And then you can say the same thing. I mean, Jyotish and I we've had both ends of the spectrum. I can say, why did you do that? And it doesn't help, it gets worse, you get estranged. But you can wait till the right moment when you're calm and just say, when that happened, that was difficult. And then you can have a discussion about it. And it's much more effective. So.
I appreciate hearing the action.
Yeah.
Not just.
No, the action.
And send it up as much.
No, the action is good, but do it from a calm place and do it so that it has maximum impact.
Absolutely.
See, that's what I learned from that incident with Swami. Emotions, a lot of riled up emotions, diminish the impact of your words. Okay?
That's really good.
One of my favorite.
And we're going to take up a collection for your husband afterwards. Sorry, go on.
Maybe I should introduce this loophole, but I think it probably takes a lot of skill, but one of my favorite stories of Yogananda was when he was acting very angry at the disciple, because that's, he was in a very calm place. As he walked away from that disciple, he's smiling and he was clear that he wasn't actually upset. But then as he walked forward, he was outwardly very angry, because sometimes that's what's needed.
That's what's
Yeah.
needed.
To energize somebody to get there. And so it's like that emotional energy can also be used.
Absolutely. If you have control
Right.
over it.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you have control
But
over
when
it.
you're calm inside, then you can.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
When it
right.
takes over, then it's just a reaction.
Oh, there were,
I'm-
go on, Jyotish.
Well, I'm going to address another topic, so
Okay,
if you
just,
want to finish.
there were times when Swami Kriyananda, not often, but 1 or 2 times, he really lit into us. And it was the only way that he would get through. But he had the control over the ability to do it. So, go ahead.
Okay, now this is a tangential but important topic. Who is it our duty to correct? To whom are we teachers?
Well, we have a son.
We have a son.
All right? I would say it's your duty to correct him. He's come into your family. He's still in a period of training. But we so often carry with us our own negative take on things. Well, where does an emotion come from, especially a negative emotion? As Devi said this morning in the Gita, she said, gazing on something creates desire. But put another way, we have certain expectations of how the world is supposed to act and how people are supposed to act. And when they do not act that way, we become frustrated. And that frustration produces anger. And that anger produces loss of control of the consciousness. And so that's the progression. So if we have a lot of expectations, call those expectations buttons. If we have a lot of buttons, the world is going to push those buttons, period. It's just going to do it. And so where does our responsibility lie to your son, your husband, perhaps your father has signed up to be corrected by you. But he may not have, Right, not likely. And so we signed up and explicitly told Swami Kriyananda, we want your correction. And so we were open to it. And even then, he rarely did it, only when we really needed it. But the stranger that you come in contact with, the person driving next to you who cuts you off, they haven't signed up for you being their teacher. And so when you act in the role of a teacher to someone who isn't open to that, you get a pushback. And so my rule of thumb is I do not give advice to anybody unless they ask me for it. And that can be implicit. Once in a while, I'll give them some feedback, but it generally isn't advice.
Okay, let's move on to another question. Did someone over there have a hand? Okay.
So kind of related to that, I was thinking along the same lines of like interpersonal things and reactions. I'm also an emotional person, and I'm working on the same kind of thing. And the thing I kind of fall into sometimes is that when somebody says something that pushes on me, it's kind of comes out of left field, like I'm not expecting it necessarily, and it just kind of stuns me. And so I'm I don't know if I'm repressing or if I'm just stunned, but then the hard part for me is like, okay, maybe I'm not reacting negatively, but I'm not really, I guess, tuning to whatever station I need to tune in for the appropriate response and filling that gap with what should be said, or how, or maybe not even said, but just the correct response. And a lot of times I feel like if I just don't say anything, it's just kind of the wrong energetic thing, and the person, you know, at times it feels as though, like, you know, I'm perceived more of like a pushover, like, oh, okay, I could just treat this person this way and they're not going to stand up for themselves, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, really the questions are related, and it's a big problem in human interaction. How do we know when to say, when to respond, and how to respond? And, you know, I don't know about you, but I could write a book about all the lines that I wished I would have said that I thought of, you know, 3 weeks later. If only I had said that at that moment. And, you know, but in a way I think it's just as well to have a delayed reaction. But if you felt something was unfair or unkind or whatever it might be, it's good to, as we were saying to Sandy, think about it. Let it become, come from a place of truth and integrity, where you're not saying it with any emotional pushback, but just, when you said that, it felt like it violated my personal space. And I'm not asking you to change. I'm not mad. I just want you to know, if we have, in an ongoing relationship, those words or that situation are difficult for me to deal with. And it gives the other person the space. It isn't like you're just saying you're wrong and you're bad and I'm right and you stepped out of line, but just let's learn how to communicate. And it's such a beautiful art, and it takes years, really years, in friendships or marriages or whatever it might be. But part of, and again, not suppression, because suppression says your feelings are not worth considering. And that we know that's not true. We know our feelings have some validity, but some validity. The other person has their own reality too. And so to try to objectively express, this is my reality. When you said that, it felt like you were saying to me, you're so stupid, you never get anything right. And the other person could say, it isn't at all what I was implying. And so to be able to understand each other by calm, objective conversation. And it's not easy. It's an art form, but it really builds for deep communication and deep bonds and relationships. But I remember once, early on, okay, I'm just going to say this story.
Should I put my earplugs in?
But you might jump out of the closet. No, I'm just going to say this story. Early on in our marriage, whether this was a true perception or not, there was a woman that I felt was always flirting with Jyotish, and it really bugged me. And whether it was true or not, it's how I felt. And he, as always, is impersonal and friendly and kind to all. And I could either say, oh, this isn't real, it's not, or I could say, I feel this. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm perceiving it totally wrong. But this woman who told us we were going to get married, that Hari Priya was her name, I went and I talked with her, and I just said, I'm feeling jealous. And it was like, I felt so stupid saying that. What a stupid emotion to be jealous. But I felt it. And she let me talk, and she just said, I think you just got a big chunk of it out. That was what she said. And it she didn't make me deny it or repress it. She just said, you're working through it. And, you know, it all moved on and time changed and everything was fine. But, so in other words, if you don't acknowledge your own feelings, you never can get them, you can never release them. It doesn't, and the best way to do it maybe is just to have a little talk with God about it. But we can't always feel complete with that. So then it's good to share with maybe a friend you trust and just say, maybe I'm seeing this wrong, but this is how I feel. And what do I do about that? You know?
And if possible, with a friend who can see it at a higher level than where you're seeing it, because they'll help you work through it, as opposed to somebody who's going to encourage, in this case, jealousy as the proper thing to feel in all cases.
Yeah, that's right. It's good to have friends that won't just agree with you, but who can be objective and say, I love you, but I don't think you're seeing this right. You know, it's nice to get feedback like that.
And to reverse that, if you have a friend that you know cares about you, and then they can give you advice, it's very different from somebody that you feel doesn't care about you and is giving you advice. So leading, when we work with other people, leading with kindness and acceptance and love sets the stage for then being able to give advice with your child. You know, if he knows, is secure that in your love and your caring and your wisdom, then he may not, in the teenage years, you know, he may not be able to express the gratitude. But our son, who's now 40, can go back and express the gratitude for what we did at that time that he couldn't express when he was 14 or 16.
Okay, 2 questions, and then Nancy.
I have been exploring, and I come from a Buddhist path, and so I've been exploring it. And I wasn't going to bring this up, because I don't want to ruffle feathers, but you gave me permission by saying, but I feel this. So I want to ask the head honchos. I've been... And this is not particular to Ananda, but it is very prevalent in all religions, and that is the masculine language. It just, having worked at sexual assault centers and representing women in court that were abused and blah, 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 you know, when I hear the word brotherhood, I feel left out. If I hear, you know, he, father, I do hear about Divine Mother. I don't see her anywhere, but, you know.
You will.
And then I know, you know, I meet these wonderful, loving people who are focusing on joy. I know this is a better route than to stay in the Western box, the Western north, okay? I see that. I want to support it, okay? But I have this thing that's going, every time I'm trying to chant or whatever, you know, and I feel like it just would be so easy to say human or person instead of, so.
Yeah, no, it's a perfectly good question for, and don't, no feathers ruffled.
Well, mine are.
But, you know, I think the more you explore Yogananda's teachings, the more you will find this extraordinary integration of the male and female together. So it's not brotherhood, sisterhood, but it's just kind of a deep appreciation for the different qualities that God expresses. And, you know, Yogananda worshiped God in the form of Divine Mother. And that was his image that he used, that God is the mother. In fact, he said, you can worship God as Father or Mother, but Mother is closer than the Father. But I think not to get stuck in either or, but just to, when you look at so many of the pictures of Yogananda, he was perfectly androgynous, a perfect blend of masculine and feminine. And often let's say I'll be wearing a little pendant with his picture, or he'll be on a book that I have or something, and people will come up to me and say, "Oh, is that your mother?" And so it's a very integrated path, and I think as you explore it, you will experience it for yourself. And Swami Kriyananda was a craftsman of words. And often people will say, well, can't you say he, she, or brotherhood, sisterhood? And he said, it's just too awkward grammatically and literarily. But the concept, the consciousness behind it, is certainly one of deep appreciation for both those sides of our nature and part of the teachings, and it's true of Buddhism too, that we've had many lives, we've been many things, we've been men and women and, animals, and Yogananda said he could remember back to when he was a diamond, a mineral. That's that's a long
Hopefully
time.
a long time ago.
Yeah.
Although sometimes I wonder.
But all that to say, I think as we evolve spiritually, we feel those different aspects within the what one might call the masculine and the feminine. And we feel them merging within us. And then whatever form is more, for me, the form that I worship most is the Guru, is Yogananda. And I don't think of him as a man or a woman. I say he because he was born in a masculine body, but I don't think of him in that way. I think of him as the consciousness he was called by a very close disciple, an incarnation of divine love. And that's how I see him, and that's the aspect of him that draws me the most. So,
In the age that we find ourselves in, we are still very imbalanced in an overly masculine consciousness. And we have come through the yuga of Kali Yuga, which is even worse. It's beginning to lighten now, which is why subjects like feminism and the question of language and gender and all of that is even on the table. 100 years, 500, 1,000 years ago, that question would never even arisen. So we're coming out of that, but we have a long ways to go before we get truly balanced. Languaging is maybe in a transition, and maybe it will get there, but my view is if you push artificially the languaging, it actually exacerbates the problem, doesn't cure it. So if you always have to say he/she or a substitute for that, it enhances the sexual difference, whereas in English we don't have a neuter. In German they have, masculine, feminine, and neuter pronouns. We don't have that in English. And so if you try to artificially create a neuter, you actually awaken in the consciousness or subconsciousness the difference, masculine and feminine difference. So language has yet to catch up. Maybe it will evolve into a point where you can say that, use that language without it being like a big yellow flag or a red flag. I hope so, but more important is our treatment of each other. And if you look at Ananda, Ananda is extremely balanced in terms of leadership roles that we have. And, you know, we've got women leaders, we've got men leaders, we've got women ministers, men ministers. It's extremely balanced in that way. But that comes from Master's teachings, because in India, they struggle even more. I tell you, in India the women are much more repressed in India than they are in the West. But mankind, womankind, humankind is all evolving toward something that this won't be such an issue, but we're far from being there.
See, when you say it wouldn't be such an issue, you're talking on this end of it. It would be such an issue for people that are used to hearing he. I'm looking at the other end, the children growing up. For them to hear human or he, she, they wouldn't have that strong reaction. And one of the beautiful, wonderful things about Ananda and all of this is setting the example for something different to happen as we evolve.
Well, you know, speaking to that, and then we'll go to one more question with Nancy, because we should be winding up. You know, when you look at the children in our schools, we have a wonderful school here in Portland at the Village, Palo Alto, Seattle, CC. I'm just amazed at who these young people are. They don't need language. They are living on a higher plane. And teenagers, I was just sharing with someone last Friday night, there were a bunch of the high school and junior high school kids in our little central market plaza area. It was Friday night, and they were sitting, boys and girls together, just absolutely equal, laughing friends. There were some little kids playing on a playground, and these high school kids were pushing the kids on the swings and helping them down the sliding board. And I thought, they don't even know that this is different, that most teenagers today are not spending Friday night like this, you know. And so I think we can create an environment where the individual is respected, and that's more important. So Nancy, last question.
Well, it's more of a comment. I just wanted to thank you for making the point that the victory is in the persistence and not giving up. And that just really was reassuring to me. So thank you so much.
Good, yeah.
A lot.
Yeah. No, it's so true. I've seen so many of my friends that I've grown up with at Ananda, and you look at them and you think, these people have become saints. And they just don't, you know, they're just trying, oh, I got mad at somebody yesterday and I didn't say the right thing, or whatever it was. And yet you just see that constant effort just transforms them. And so it's, we don't, I remember years ago, you know, I think I had been in Ananda about 10 or 15 years, and we were in a car with Swami, and he was talking about how this person has changed and how this person's changed. And I was sitting in the back seat, and I was feeling kind of more and more embarrassed and worse about myself. Like, gosh, I don't think I've made any progress here. And then finally I just said, gosh, Swami, I don't see a lot of change in me, in myself. And it was one of the times he was really strong. He whipped around and he said, how can you say that? You're a completely different person than when you came. Okay, well maybe, is there any burning question that someone, if they don't get to ask it, they'll feel, okay.
It's just a quick question about trajectory, touching empathy, faith, and knowing the saints. From my perspective, I've kind of grown up with a very strong lead view. So I struggle with something kind of respiratory distress, people start camping or something like that. And so I've kind of built my outward and spending my time, I guess is the main thing, trying to help those kind of things, trying to lessen the amount of pain in the world, I guess. And I've gotten satisfaction out of that and felt some joy and things like that. And I've been looking into spiritual things for a number of years now. And through meditation and things like that, talk about getting to that great joy and that great happiness, bliss, and things like that. I've put quite a bit of time into it, and I've had some spiritual experiences through it, but it was rather an experience as opposed to bliss or joy that I have gotten through, say, helping another animal or something like that. To where it would take a lot of faith in order to continue spending my time doing the meditation. I'm not saying I'm not religious, but this is kind of almost theoretical. Doing this meditation, I could be proactively using that time to help something that is in need of help. Right? It might not be so spiritually going. But for me to actually try and shift from helping here to somehow thinking that I'm achieving something higher than helping this animal or being or whatever, it would take, I guess, a saint is where it leads into a saint. Like if you see something, right? You're on the saw, going on to do incredible things like that. Boom, I'm in the spiritual path, right? Because you can't deny that. I guess what are your thoughts on should I live this life here, helping this? It's kind of not clicking.
It's a beautiful question.
Yeah, I would say try to do both. Meditate, but don't give up service. Don't give up trying to help. And unless you're
Just a minute, let's repeat for Stephen what he said. He said that he's a very empathetic person and he can feel other people's pain. And to the extent if somebody's having respiratory problems, he starts panting. And something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. But he gets a lot of joy from helping others in distress. In meditation, he doesn't feel a lot of joy yet. So which trajectory should he follow?
And I suggested that he do both. And meditation it's a slow, gradual process, but it will not take away your empathy. It will increase it, but it may balance it in such a way that you don't feel, I don't know how to put it exactly, you don't feel a negative aspect to it. You're wanting to help, but you're not wanting to help because you're upset inside. You're just wanting to help because it's the right thing to do. So both together, we've got to act. Why not act in such a way that we're helpful to the world, helpful to other people, and act in an uplifted way? That's a very beautiful thing to do. But unless you're very, very unusual, some couple of hours of meditation a day is not going to mean that you can't do that other part also. I suspect there's some times in your day that are neither helping other creatures or meditating, that if you needed to cut out, you could cut out some of those. So I doubt that it's really a trade-off.
And just to continue along what Jyotish was saying, the practice of meditation gives us a power within us, or a power isn't perhaps the right word, but it gives us a calmness, a centeredness, a compassion, an understanding that when we do move out then to help people, we have more to give them. And that's why saints can heal people by just touching them, or why some people, they say you're a really good listener. Well, what does that mean? It means that by your compassion, you're able to take their pain and help them release it. And so meditation gives you the ability to deal with other people's suffering, not get pulled down yourself, but to be a source of strength and comfort and healing for them in a stronger way. So it really helps you in that. Okay. So
Boo.
what?
See, I said it wouldn't work. I said boo.
What?
I said boo!
Did you ever see the movie The Producers, where this man,
It'll just,
yeah, it'll disintegrate.
Yeah.
Okay.
you don't need to see it.
Okay, we're going to take a little break, maybe for